Hi, welcome to my new tutorial, Double Entry Bookkeeping System in Accounting. This concept seems to be a bit scary and confusing for the beginners, but we'll try to explain the concepts in a very simplified manner. The learning outcomes are to develop an understanding about Double Entry Bookkeeping System, to learn how to record business transactions using Double Entry Bookkeeping System, to understand and apply the rules for recording Double Entry Bookkeeping System, and to practice the skills in recording business transactions. In business and accounting, business transactions are recorded using double entry bookkeeping system. Now, first of all, try to understand what I mean by transaction. Now, transaction is any statement that provides detail of any buying and selling. For example, a transaction can be Mr. ABC bought chocolates for £3. So when any buying and selling is for a business motive, then we say that said transaction is a business transaction. So if it's a business entity and that business entity buys or sells something, then we say that is a business transaction. So for example, we say Nestle Limited bought machinery of pound 1.5 million. Now this statement is a business transaction. So the business transactions have to be recorded following double entry bookkeeping system. What does double entry bookkeeping system means? It means that every business transaction shall be taken into consideration with two aspects, that every business transactions will have two aspects or will have two impacts. One aspect is debit and the other aspect is credit. So when you're thinking about debit and credit, you have to think in regards to your business organization. That in your business organization, whatever business you are running, as a result of the business transaction, one aspect of that business transaction is that there is some debit happening. And as a result of the same business transaction, another aspect that is happening is that is a credit is happening in your business accounts. I'll try to clarify this concept with an example. For example, Nestle purchased machinery for pound 1.5 million using cash. So it is your business, and you have to think in regards that you are owner of Nestle Corporation or you are an accountant working at Nestle Corporation. So your company, that is Nestle, purchased a machinery for pound 1.5 million using cash. Now this business transaction has two aspects. One is debit and one is credit. The debit aspect is that the machinery account has to be debited by 1.5 million and the cash account within Nestle Corporation has to be credited by 1.5 million. So that is an example that one business transaction has to be dealt in regards to two perspectives, in regards to two aspects, that is the debit and the credit. But you might be thinking, which account is to be debited and which account is to be credited? Why machinery in my previous example was debited and why cash was credited? What is the criteria? What are the rules? So there are certain rules that we have to follow when we are recording business transactions using double entry bookkeeping system. And the rule number one is that if there is increase in assets, then that aspect is recorded as debit entry. And if there is decrease in assets, then that is recorded as credit entry. Now, if a business, for example, Nestle, if in case of Nestle, there is some increase in asset happening as a result of that business transaction, then you will record that aspect as debit entry. Likewise, if there is decrease in asset as a result of that business transaction, in case of Nestle Corporation, then that will be recorded as credit entry. Now, what is assets? Assets means anything which is valuable to the business. So assets can be cash, money deposited in banks, land, building, machinery, vehicles, and there can be many examples. So whenever there is increase in assets, you will record that asset as debit. And when there is decrease in asset, you will record that asset as a credit entry. Now, in case of my previous examples where machinery was debited and cash was credited, so you can see that machinery is an asset that Nestle Corporation acquired. So there is increase in asset in case of Nestle, and that asset type was machinery. Likewise, Nestle used its cash to purchase the machinery. So the asset named cash in case of Nestle, that asset decreased. So that cash has to be credited. That is how we record business transactions, and we followed rule number one as I showed you in my previous example. Rule number two. Rule number two says when there is increase in liabilities, it is recorded as credit entry, and when there is decrease in liabilities, it is recorded as debit entry. Now, what are liabilities? Liabilities is anything which is outstanding to your business. So it can be electricity bill payable, it can be loan from a bank which you have to pay, or the interest payment on loan, or it can be some purchases that you have made but you haven't done the payment for that. So whenever there is increase in liabilities, you have to record it as a credit entry, and when there is decrease in liabilities, it has to be recorded as a debit entry. Rule number three says whenever there is increase in capital, it has to be recorded as credit entry, and when there is decrease in capital, it has to be recorded as debit entry. Capital means any investment made by owners and shareholders of the business. Now, rule number two and rule number three seems to be similar, because here we have capital, there it is liabilities, but in both cases, whenever there is increase, it is recorded as credit entry, and when there is decrease, it is recorded as debit entry. Rule number two and three are opposite to rule number one, because rule number one is increase in asset has to be debited and decrease in asset is credited. Now these rule number two and three are opposite to that, and that makes sense because that is exactly according to accounting equation, which is assets are equal to liabilities and capital. Now assets are on the right side of the equation, liabilities and capital are on the left side of the equation. So the things which are on the left side of the equation, they are recorded in the same similar pattern, and the things which are on the right side of the equation, they are recorded in the same pattern. So the rules regarding double entry bookkeeping system are following the balance sheet identity, that is the balance sheet equation, because if assets are not equal to liabilities plus capital, then it means there is some error in our account and those accounts will not be acceptable. So that's why we follow the accounting equation and we have developed rules according to that concept of balance sheet identity. Rule number 4 says when there is increase in expenses, it has to be debited, and when there is decrease in expenses, it has to be credited. Now this rule number 4 is similar to rule number 1, because increase in case of rule number 1, that is increase in asset has to be debited, and decrease in asset has to be credited. Likewise, the expenses, if increase in expenses, it has to be debited, decrease in expenses has to be credited. Now what are expenses? Expenses are any expenditure made by the company while running its operations. So it can be salaries paid to the staff, wages paid to the staff, utility bills, rent payment, wear and tear of the machinery, that is the depreciation. So those things all come under expenses. It can be operating expenses, it can be admin expenses, it can be general expenses. Rule number 5 says when there is increase in revenue, it has to be credited, and when there is decrease in revenue, it has to be debited. Now rule number 5 is similar to rule number 3, where it says increase in capital is recorded as credit and in decrease in capital is recorded as debit. And there is a reason why rule number 5 is similar to rule number 3, because revenue is considered to be part of the capital. And what is revenue? Revenue is basically the value of sales generated by the company. So whatever sales the company has made, the value, the worth of that sales is called the revenue. So following rule number 5, increase in revenue is credited and decrease in revenue is to be debited. Rule number 6 is that the debit side must be equal to the credit side. It can't be that the debit side can be higher or lower than the credit side. If that happens, it means there is some error that has been made while recording the transaction. Either there is some omission of errors, some aspect of the transaction has been omitted, or some aspect of the transaction has been recorded twice, and that has to be rectified. If the debit side meets the credit side, it means the business transaction has been properly recorded and there is no errors. As I explained to you, the business transaction has the two aspects, and in case of machinery, when you purchase a machinery for £150 million, the worth of the machinery is 150 millions. And for that worth, you paid an equivalent amount of cash, that is 150 million. So that is why it makes sense that the debit side is always equal to the credit side. So to develop your further understanding about recording business transactions and applying the following rules, I'm giving you some examples. So one example is Nestle Limited purchased land for £50 million and made payment through bank transfer. Now land is an asset, and increase in the asset named land has to be recorded as debit entry. Bank account is another asset of Nestle Corporation, and when you make bank transfer, then there is decrease in the value of asset named bank in case of Nestle Corporation. So that is why, as you can see, land account is debited by 50 million and bank account is credited by 50 million. Another example, Nestle purchased printer for £500 on credit from Staples Limited. Now, Nestle didn't pay for the printer. Nestle bought it on credit. Now, this seems to be a bit tricky, but try to make it simpler. Printer is an asset, and there is increase in the value of asset named printer. So printer has to be debited by £500. Likewise, there is a liability generated, and when there is increase in the liability, it has to be credited. So liability account, which we in technical terms refer to as accounts payable, or we just mention the name of the uh, creditor, that is Staples account. So we mention accounts payable, Staples, and we mention it as £500, and that is credited. So here two rules are being applied. Rule number one, because there is increase in the value of asset, so rule number one is applied, and rule number two is applied because here there is increase in the value of assets, and when there is increase in the value of asset, according to rule number two, it has to be credited. Owners of Nestle made an investment by depositing 500 million in Nestle bank account. Now here, as you can see, money is going into Nestle's bank account, so there is increase in the value of asset named bank account. So bank account will be debited. Likewise, there is increase in the value of capital, and whenever there is increase in the value of capital, it has to be credited according to rule number 3. So capital account is credited by 500 million. Now you can notice that the debit side is exactly equal to the credit side. So here you'll find some practice questions to apply the various rules that I mentioned in my previous slides. ABC Corporation purchased inventory for $400 using company's bank account. So as you can see, there are two assets. One is inventory, one is bank account, and one is being debited, the other is being credited. Question number 2. ABC Corporation purchased machinery from XYZ Co. for $10,000 on credit. Now machinery is being purchased, so value of machinery is going up by 10,000, and there is increase in the value of liabilities by 10,000. ABC Corporation paid the owner 2,000 as drawings. Now the money is coming in the form of cash, you can assume, or it's going into the bank. So there is increase in the value of asset named cash or bank, and that is 2,000. Drawings is something when the owners of the business withdraw some money from the business. That is called drawings. So it is opposite to investment. In investment, the owners are putting their money into the business. Drawings is when they are withdrawing money from their business. So when drawings happen, there is decrease in the value of capital. And whenever there is decrease in the value of capital, it has to be debited according to rule number 3. Question number 4. ABC Corporation paid salaries to its staff for 60,000. Now when salaries are paid, that is an expense, and when there is increase in expense, it has to be debited, and when the salaries are paid using cash or bank account, there will be a decrease in the value of asset named bank. Question number 5. ABC Corporation paid the outstanding amount of 10,000 to XYZ Co. So when an outstanding amount is paid, there is decrease in the liabilities, and when decrease in liabilities means it has to be debited according to rule number 2, and the value of asset named cash will decrease. So according to rule number 1, it has to be credited. ABC received a bank loan of 90,000. So when the loan is received, it goes into your bank. So the value of asset named bank increases. But at the same time, a liability arises. There is increase in liabilities. So it has to be credited. Liability account has to be credited. ABC Corporation paid monthly rent of 3,000 for 1 year. So when you are paying rent, that is an expense. So you have to multiply the monthly rent with the yearly, so 3,000 times 12, and then that will be the annual rent payment. And when it's being done, it's the expense and it has to be debited. And you'll be using your bank account. So the money is going out from your bank account, so it has to be credited by equivalent amount. Question number 8. ABC Corporation sold goods for a price of 50,000 and received 20,000 payment as cash. ABC Corporation will receive remaining 30,000 in next 3 months. Now this is tricky because when the goods are sold, then it means there is increase in revenue, and when there is increase in revenue, it has to be credited. And then when you sell something, you receive some payment, so 20,000 received as cash, so it will be debited because that's increase in the value of assets named cash. Remaining 30,000 will be paid in 3 months, and this is also a type of cash which is called account receivable, because you haven't received this money now, but you will be receiving in near future. So that is why it is also recorded as the value of asset, and there is increase in the value of asset, and that is corresponding to rule number 1. So here you'll find the activity questions that I just explained to you, and I've tried to share with you the solutions. Again, there is a solution to the following questions from the activity. So these are the references, the books which I have consulted in developing the learning material. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my content. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. See you next time.